You complain about having to get up early for school, having to do homework, or being bored in class. Well, think about how much tougher it was back in the 1980s. There were no smartphones, no smartboards, and no Google. So here's a look at what school was really like back then. Part 1. The classroom in the 1980s. Classrooms were much different than they are today. Instead of having fancy smartboards and Apple TVs, classrooms had chalkboards and overhead projectors. Students sat at desks that were lined up in neat rows, facing the teacher, who was the center of attention in the classroom. They would use film strips or VHS tapes for educational videos, which were really boring compared to the YouTube videos we watch today. Can you imagine? Back then, if you wanted to be a class clown, you had to be pretty creative, because there was no internet or cell phones to distract you. And instead of taking notes on an iPad, students had to write their notes down on paper. And when they made a mistake, they had to get up from their desk and walk over to the teacher's desk to get some whiteout, which, by the way, was the only way to correct any mistakes. Also, if you fell asleep in class, there was no discreet way to take a nap. Your head would just fall on your desk and everyone would stare at you. Part 2. Homework and research. If you needed to do research for a school project in the 80s, you had to go down to the library and dig through these things called encyclopedias. These were huge books with tons of information, but it was very hard to find what you wanted. Sometimes you couldn't even find anything good until you had to go to the card catalog, which was basically like Google in reverse. If you wanted to type up a paper, you'd have to go to a computer lab and wait your turn on an old clunky computer with a word processor. Then you'd have to print out your paper and hand it in. There was no sharing documents online or sending them via email. And if you needed to send a message to someone, you had to actually write it out on a piece of paper and hand it to them. Part 3. Supplies and fashion. Every 80s kid remembers getting new school supplies. And there were some pretty iconic items, like the Trapper Keeper, which was a binder that kept all your papers organized. It also came in a variety of fun colors and designs, and every student wanted one. Of course, you needed pencils, erasers, and sharpeners. And if you were lucky, you might have had a cool pencil case or pouch to put them in. And who could forget the Lisa Frank notebooks and folders? They were covered in colorful animals and rainbows and made studying a little more fun. But backpacks were a different story. They were huge and heavy because they were filled with textbooks. There was no such thing as an e-book back then. And if you wanted to read ahead or do some extra research, you had to lug around a bunch of heavy books. Part 4. Social life in the 80s. Kids didn't spend nearly as much time together as they do now. Passing notes in class was kind of like texting. And instead of texting on a phone, kids would write messages on a piece of paper and pass them to their friends. When the bell rang, they would meet up at their lockers to chat and maybe make plans to hang out after school. After school, they might go to the mall, an arcade, roller skating rink, or just hang out at someone's house. Face-to-face socializing was a big part of the 80s culture. And although it seems quaint now, it's a stark contrast to the amount of time kids spend online today. In fact, some kids spend so much time on social media that they don't even talk to each other anymore. They would rather text or direct message each other than actually talk in person. Part 5. School lunch and activities. School lunch in the 80s was pretty simple. It usually consisted of a cheese or pepperoni pizza, a carton of chocolate milk, and a cup of Jell-O. There weren't a lot of options back then, but at least it was hot and fresh. Today, many schools offer a variety of lunch options, including salad bars, fruit, smoothies, and more. There are even some schools that have a la carte options, where kids can choose exactly what they want to eat. After school, kids in the 80s had a variety of activities they could participate in, such as band, cheerleading, football, and other sports. There was also the school newspaper and other extracurricular activities. However, today, many kids spend their time after school playing video games, streaming, or creating content. Although school life in the 80s lacked technology, it had its own kind of charm. Face-to-face friendships, hands-on learning, and a lot more paper cuts. Which do you think is better? the 80s school experience, or today's high-tech classrooms? Comment below. Now watch. What school will you attend? The future of education. Or check out, what was school like in the 90s?